Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Schollmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome to another edition of Aging Insight. I'm your host, John Ross, here with Lisa Schollmeyer, my co-host and business partner, and today we're going to be providing you information that many of you might need out there, because that's what we do every week. We know that you want to age on your terms. You want to stay independent, you want to avoid becoming a burden on others, you want to protect those very necessary resources that you've managed to accumulate over your lifetime, and with a little luck, avoid any sort of institutionalized care. And we know that those things are possible. You can do it. You can navigate through this retirement and through these senior years if you are armed with the knowledge of how to do it and what to look out for. And so we try to bring you lots of good information about these sort of things. Lisa, one of the things that I see actually on a pretty routine basis is that as people are going into their retirement years, or even while they're well into those retirement years, they still got some stuff going on.
Yeah, they sure do. And we live in an area where we've got, we have a lot of people that work in manufacturing and some of our industries in our local area, but we also have a lot of people who run chicken houses, run cows.
Maybe they've got a little auto body shop with their son that they work at. Maybe they're they're a retired firefighter, but every firefighter on the planet's got a second job.
That's right. Maybe they have a home improvement business, tile laying business.
Yeah, a little moving van that they move people around. So we see lots of people that have business interests. Maybe that was your sole form of income, and that's what you're now looking to retire from. Maybe that business has built up quite a bit of value, and you're trying to figure out how to protect it and how to pass that business down. Maybe it's a small business. Maybe it's just something that you do on the side, and yet even a small business can have assets. It can have some value, which could have issues related to long-term care planning.
That's right. So one of the assets that folks, they often overlook is that business interest asset. They know about their house and their CDs and investments, but, sometimes folks think, oh, well, that little business interest isn't really anything to be too concerned about. But yet, really part of accomplishing those goals of not being a burden on others and remaining independent is, to preserve your assets, or to make sure that they're at their highest and best use, or that you're getting the highest and best value for those assets. And many times those small business assets or those side business assets are also part of that legacy that you want to pass on to future generations. So it's worth protecting and giving some thought to.
Yeah, and so to kind of start off this, the first thing we've got to do is we've got to give you a little bit of background, because when you start talking about businesses, that term's a little bit broad.
Sure.
So when we start talking about businesses, I want to make a distinction between what's called a sole proprietorship, or some sort of formed entity like a corporation or an LLC. And you see lots of those different things that are out there. But the big difference between these two is whether or not the entity exists by itself. So if I decide I'm a great baker, and so I want to bake cakes, and I'm going to build a bakery and start a baking business, if I do it all in my name, then I am what's called a sole proprietor. It is my business. And legally speaking, there's no difference between the business and myself. We are both one and the same. Whereas if I were to form a corporation or a limited liability company, an LLC, or some other registered entity, well then that entity exists separately from me. There's me, who's the owner, and then the business, which exists on its own. Kind of like giving birth to a brand new thing out there. And this can be a pretty big deal, because if that business is a sole proprietorship, and it's the same as me, then if I die,
That's right. Your business dies also.
it dies also.
Yeah, legally it dies
Legally.
now. You know, you may still have, and this has been an issue where we have had sole proprietorships, and you know, that sole proprietor or business, the person who started the business, passed away. Children or other family members stepped up, but that's a new and different business.
It sure is.
Even if it's under the same name.
That's right. And the problem is with all of the different contracts and things. So again, if I've started my little bakery, and maybe some hotel hired me to provide all of the wedding cakes for the next 2 years. I'm going to do every wedding cake at that hotel. Well, if I'm a sole proprietorship and I die, that contract dies.
That's right.
And my kids might be thinking, oh, well, they're going to take over my business and keep making cakes, but they would have to enter into new agreements, and the hotel may not want to.
That's right.
And there's nothing stopping them. And we have seen in our practice, we have seen people who had sole proprietorships and had built up relatively successful, well-known businesses, but because they were not a separate entity, that when they died, that business died along with them and collapsed.
Right. And you know, of course, if you think about it, the people that you're doing business with, you know, in your example of being a bakery, I mean, maybe that hotel knows that you are a good baker. They're not so sure about your kids or, you know, whomever might take over your business.
That's right. So that's a big issue. And of course, a lot of people think about it in terms of death, and they think, but the other big issue is what happens if you become disabled. Because again, if you for example, I had a client and they owned a restaurant in a small town, and it was a very popular restaurant. Everybody liked their food. Everybody liked.
It was a small town.
It was a small town. They didn't have a lot of options, and yet,
Right.
but this was the best of those options.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get in the place at lunchtime. It's great. It was owned by a husband and wife. Well, the wife ended up having some catastrophic illnesses, required long-term care.
Required the attention of her husband in the caregiving
Yes.
capacities.
And now we're in this middle of this health crisis, and we're trying to figure out, they can't afford, the business does okay, but it doesn't generate enough money to drop $5,000 a month at a nursing home.
Right.
And so we start looking at trying to access benefits and things like that. And that can get real tricky real fast. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about what do you do with that business in the event of incapacity. So stick around, we'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioners still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
I'm so glad we found the Wadley Senior Clinic. Their team specializes in caring for older adults, and their doctors listen and work with me to keep me healthy and independent. With monthly educational programs, x-ray and lab, and state-of-the-art exam rooms, I get expert care and understanding about what I'm going through. Best yet, they're easy to get to right off the interstate at Jefferson. See what Wadley Senior Clinic could do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer, and I'm here with John Ross. and we are elder law attorneys based here in the Arklatex area. And we bring Aging Insight to you every week to address some burning questions you may have, or maybe that fit your circumstances or someone else that you know. And today we are talking about businesses as an asset that you may have as part of your retirement support or in your retirement portfolio. And these are, John, we're talking about businesses where that retiree, that senior is an active participant or, in somewhat, an active role. We're not talking about having shares.
Right, we're not talking about owning stock in Walmart.
Right.
We're talking about where you're actually participating in some sort of business venture. And it doesn't have to be a big business venture. It can be a small, right before the break I was talking about a restaurant. It was a successful restaurant, but it was in a very small town, and these folks made a fine living off of it, but no different than any other middle-class family in the community. And so when health struck them and they needed long-term care, they were looking for how to pay for that. When it comes to paying for long-term care, you're either going to pay cash, which they couldn't afford, or you try to qualify for some sort of government assistance, which, unless you're a veteran, comes in one form.
That's right. It comes in Medicaid.
Right.
So,
luckily for them, one of the things that Medicaid will allow you to keep certain types of assets, and they don't count them towards your eligibility. And one of those things that they do not count is property that is used in a trade or business.
That's right. So if you do have a business that is ongoing and a health crisis comes along, well, the assets that make up that business, so long as it's all used in the furtherance of that business, generally are going to be exempt, because that business, like in the example with the restaurant, that business is what produces the monthly income that the family is relying upon to support themselves. So that's the reason for the exemption. But there's a couple of catches here. Number one is that in order to show that this business is a valid, legitimate, operating business that creates some sort of value for this family, you have to file tax returns, and that could be in the form of a Schedule C that is attached to your own Form 1040, and that's a tax form you submit for any businesses that you run as a sole proprietorship. Or it could be a partnership or corporate tax return, but again, you are reporting your business revenue, your business expenses, and depreciating your business property on your tax returns. So it's very easy to see that those items are in fact part of a business interest.
Right. And so, you've got to have, if you're talking about trying to exclude it as a business, you've got to have proof that it's a business. But the other place you can run into problems here is, for example, if maybe you had that business and at some point in time you decided, you know what, I'm tired of working in this thing. My son or my daughter is handling everything, so I'll just back off and I'll let them do all of the work and they can take all the money from it. Well, if they're doing all the work and they're taking all the money, it's not going to show up on your tax return, and it might not be excluded as a business interest based on the circumstances. So that can be an issue where it might end up being a countable asset. The other issue that I have seen here very recently was somebody who had they had a small business, a little mechanic shop. Well, they owned the building that the mechanic shop was in, and then they had their business that did the mechanic shop. And years and years ago, their CPA had told them, you have the business, which is in this case was a corporation. But they said, don't put the land and the building in the business. You're going to rent, from yourself, essentially. You've got your business, and that's going to rent the building. Well, unfortunately, when it came time for a long-term care situation, the business itself and the tools and the car lifts and all of that sort of stuff, those things were not countable because they were business assets. But since the building was not part of that business, since it was separately owned, that was just considered investment property. And under Medicaid, investment property is a countable asset. And so these people had made what was a good choice for tax purposes that later turned out to be a bad choice from a long-term care standpoint. And so you can't rely on a decision that even was a good decision when you made it.
There was nothing wrong with the advice that came from the CPA on
that. But
from a tax standpoint.
From a tax standpoint, but it was a bad situation when it came to a long-term care, and that could have been addressed early on.
Sure.
By either having a different business entity or having that building held in a trust that wouldn't count for Medicaid purposes. Several different ways that they could have structured that so that it would not have put them in such a desperate situation. Unfortunately, it was a desperate situation that was very, very difficult to solve on our part because they didn't want to sell the building because that's where they used, and yet they couldn't pay for their care. So that can get very touchy very fast.
You know, John, and one of the other issues that I've seen come up in these type deals is when perhaps there's a partnership where the husband is in partnership with his brother.
Oh yeah, see that all the time.
Yes, but the spouse, the wife, is not a named partner. She's not involved. It's just the partnership is between the two brothers. And so the income from the partnership, they file their tax returns. The income from the partnership is going, into the name of the husband. But yet, if the husband has that health crisis and needs a long-term care situation, we've got some issues with how that income is going to be counted.
Right, because income, again, is figured into how much, if any, you have to pay toward your nursing home bill. And generally, Medicaid counts the person who's in the nursing home, counts their income, right, but generally does not count the spouse's income. Right. And so we have seen several situations where what we really needed to do was have that income paid to the spouse, right, and yet they didn't have any official ownership in the business. Because again, it was just two brothers and they started their business and that's the way it always was, and they never even thought about these sort of issues until they slapped them in the face. And so that can be a big deal. So, if you have an interest in a family business, a small business, a big business, it doesn't really matter. You're going to need the advice of a good accountant as far as all the taxes, but you need to be contemplating both the death issues and the divorce and the disability issues.
Yes.
In all of this. Frankly, you should have addressed the divorce issues too.
As well. Yeah, so as you approach your, older years, retirement years, it's time to get a checkup on those assets that are business assets, and make sure that you're making the right tax choices as well as the right choices for asset protection and your own care planning. So when we come back from this next break, we're going to talk about a way to pass that business interest on as a legacy to your heirs and how to do that best and still make sure that you can provide for your own care needs. So stick with us.
The Wadley Senior Clinic has been such a blessing for our family. Because they specialize in geriatric care, they take the time to really focus on Dad's needs. Their exam rooms are specially designed for seniors, and they offer lab and x-ray on site. With monthly educational programs on health and wellness of the mind and body, our healthcare questions get answered. Best of all, they accept Dad's Medicare benefits. See what the Wadley Senior Clinic can do for you. Wadley Senior Clinic, where healthy relationships begin.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
Welcome back to Aging Insight, everybody. I'm John Ross here with Lisa Scholmeyer, and today we're talking about dealing with business interests. I would say that this is a very common topic in our office. People have they have an interest in a business. Maybe it's something that they built. Maybe that's how they made their living. Maybe they've got a partnership interest with a family member or some other person. But dealing with these business interests can be very, very tricky, and you've got lots of different laws involved here, so you've got to make sure you do it right. Now, we talked about from a death standpoint, from a long-term care standpoint, but probably, you know, in the happy families, a lot of times they're just coming in saying, John, I want to pass this business down. You know, my son's been working in it for years, and now I just want to turn it all over to him, and yet I might still want some income off the business, but I don't want it to mess up my Social Security, and things like that. And so trying to figure out the best way to pass a business down at death can be pretty important.
Right, and you know, that's certainly something that you don't want to leave just hanging out there. I mean, there's nothing more of a mess than when you've got a business that a child's been working in and you don't have anything in writing or a succession plan as to how that business is going to pass to that selected child. You know, particularly if you have other children that may not have an interest in the business or have a active role in the business. Boy, that's just a situation.
Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because you have the one child that works in the business and works hard and has done a good job and helped you build it to the success it is, that somehow your other kids are going to be okay with that one kid getting the whole business, despite the fact that they may have never done anything to assist with that. Oftentimes those kids may feel a sense of entitlement to some portion of that business. And so you need to structure these sort of things very, very carefully. As a general rule, I would say that it is almost always a bad idea to divide up a business among family members, some of which do not work in the business. Those family members are never going to put in the same amount of effort that the ones who work in the business are, and yet they may still be entitled to a similar amount of income from the business. That's going to create animosity, it's going to create family fights, and ultimately it's going to destroy that business. So you want to be very careful about that. Also, if you are talking about pulling out of the business and transferring it to that child, there are several different ways that you can do this as a way to structure it so you get the best tax benefits and all kinds of things. For example, oftentimes people will say, well, I just want to turn it over to my son, and yet I'm going to keep taking a salary from the business based on what I used to take. Well, of course, if you're if you've already taken Social Security, then that might deplete your Social Security if you're under age 70. If you're over that, then what that extra income might do is cause your Social Security to be taxable. Won't necessarily reduce the Social Security, but it could cause the Social Security to become taxable. Whereas if you were to, for example, sell that business to the child and structure it so that those payments that you're getting from the sale are equal to what you would have drawn as a salary, well, the sale is treated as capital gain, and that is typically taxed at a lower percentage rate and has no effect on Social Security. So with a little bit of planning, you might be able to figure out a way to how to transfer that business down to that next generation and do it in a way that maximizes both the tax and the Social Security benefits. And on top of that, if you do a little bit of extra planning, you know, if I sell you the business, I still own this note.
That's right.
And this note has value.
That's right, it sure does. And if you have a long-term care crisis and you're still holding the note and that it's not completely paid off yet, or maybe you just started, then that note has a value, and that is an asset that is counted as one of your available assets to pay for long-term care, even though it's just a piece of paper.
That's right. So it might even make sense to use like an asset protection trust as a way to hold, I could transfer the business into the trust and then have the trust sell you the business. And that way those payments are going into a trust that I can still control, I can still benefit from, and yet the value of all of that, the remaining payments that are coming due, the value of all of that might not be a countable asset for my Medicaid benefits if I ever need a long-term care situation. So, we talk about elder law not being a type of law.
Right.
That we henpeck lots of different types of law. And when it comes to having an interest in a small business, even if it really is a small business, you're still going to have a tax issue, you're going to have a business entity issue, you're going to have long-term care issues, you're going to have wills and trusts issues, so all of these sort of things. So you might not necessarily think of a business interest as being an elder law issue, but it will be if you live long enough.
That's right. So, and of course, most importantly is to give these things some thought in advance, because a lot of times we do need to get things reduced to writing and get a plan in place. Otherwise you're in crisis, and sometimes poor decisions get made at that crisis point.
That's
so
right.
Think
well,
about it in advance.
If you have additional questions, you can always call us during our live radio show, which comes on at noon every Saturday on 98.5. That's Aging Insight Radio. And of course, you can always pick up a copy of our Aging Insight magazine at your local doctor's office or hospital and learn more about the kind of things that we talk about right here on the show. But until next time, we'll have more programming for you. So stick with us next week. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by
Investors who take the time to check the credentials of a financial professional can greatly reduce the chance of falling victim to a fraudulent scheme. That's the word from the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. To help, the CFTC